Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Lynn and today I am flipping the April Spellbinders Club Kits. And as per usual for my flip videos, I'll be making at least one flat, one layered, one interactive, and one pop-up card. Here's a quick look at the cards that I'll be making in this video. And across all of these cards, I am mixing and matching the small die of the month, the large die of the month, the 3D embossing folder of the month, the clear stamp and die of the month, and also the Glimmer of the month. I do also use a bit of the quick and easy card kit of the month, but I'll actually have a separate video featuring just the quick and easy card kit where I only use items from that kit. So let's make these. Okay, so let's start off with my flat card. And many of my cards today are kind of pushing the boundaries as to whether they technically by my own definition would qualify, and this might be one of them, but it features the Glimmer of the month, which I really love the Glimmer of the month because there's actually a companion stencil that you can get. It's a add-on, and I think it's sold separately. And I'll show you in a little bit, but it lets you actually color in the leaves in a sort of two-layered effect where you can actually introduce a little bit of depth, a little bit of shadow to those leaves. So really fabulous. Love that that we have that as an option. So the Glimmer of the month, I always neglect to mention when I do my unboxings that it does also include a roll of foil. And so I usually never mention it because I often just put the foil when I get it in with the rest of my stash. But it's really fabulous because every month you're going to get that roll of foil, and so it's nice to kind of replenish your stash. And here I'm actually using those really small rolls that you get when you first buy your Glimmer machine. So those do last quite a while. It just depends on how much foiling you actually do, but they can last quite a while. On this main panel here, this is actually my card base that I'm foiling onto. And so I do have it scored so I know where the front of the card is exactly. And I've already glimmered the main glimmer plate once. I've rotated it around and I'm going to glimmer the other half. So the design actually fits on two full panels of the glimmer plate will fit onto one USA 2 size panel. And so here's what it looks like all glimmered up, and I'm going to bring out the stencil. The stencil has two halves to it. So one half of it, you'll see that the openings are a little bit larger. And so I like to use that one first and go in with a lighter color. When I'm using layered stencils like this one, I like to start with my lightest color, and then as the details, the different layers of the stencils kind of get smaller in detail, then I go darker because you can't lighten up an area that is dark. So if you start with a darker color, putting a lighter color on top of that would just really make it darker. And so there are some techniques where you might want to work in the reverse. So let's say you wanted to do a water lifting technique, you definitely could go in with a darker color and then using the more detailed opening, spritz some water and then dab it with a paper towel to actually lift some color. So lots of different ways to use layered stencils, but this is the way that I would typically use it. And it's gorgeous getting all of this detail in here. So I've just chosen 2 different shades of green. And these are rather small openings. I do have a smaller detail brush, which I think might have been a little bit more ideal just to get into all of those corners, but the sponge dauber still worked just great. So I've also, the Glimmer of the Month also comes with a die that coordinates to cut out just a few of the leaves of this design. So it doesn't actually die cut out the complete, like an outline, but instead gives you some individual leaves. And what's interesting that I thought, which I didn't see or notice at first when I did the unboxing, is that there's just the one, maybe it's about a third or 40% of the die, that 40% of the Glimmer design that the die actually cuts out. And in that little section, there's actually a couple of leaves that don't get die cut. And I think part of it is because the design is so close together that the die maybe can't cut those out. And so I just fussy cut them because it's already glimmered, it's already colored. Why not just hand cut it out and then still have it to use? So I took the very same die that cut out the individual stems and leaves, and I just die cut it out of some iridescent mirror card to use as a bit of a shadow, because the individual leaves that I cut out was a separate, I did it off camera. I just glimmered up a small section and did the exact same stenciling. So they look exactly the same as the background, but I wanted to be able to set it apart a little bit from the background a little bit, just so that you can see the design and it doesn't completely blend into the background. And so that's why I did cut it out from, I used the exact same die to cut out from just some specialty card. And technically, by layering these 2 die cuts of the leaves, I think that goes a little bit beyond my formal definition of a flat card, but I think it's still relatively flat and will ship without any additional postage necessary. So moving on to my layered card, this one you might kind of bridge to consider a little bit of an interactive card too, but I have another interactive card planned, as you saw at the beginning of the video, so I'm going to consider this one more of a layered card. But it is also relatively flat, so lots of my cards in today's video are a little bit of crossover cards. I'm starting off with the clear stamp of the month, and I'm actually stamping onto the inside of a 5x5 card. And this stamp has so much pretty detail to it, and I did want to try something a little bit different with the idea of having an aperture that is cut out of the front of your card and reveals a portion of a larger design that's on the inside of the card. And the reason why this particular stamp and die set works really well is because there is this larger floral design, but the coordinating dies that go along with it, there's a die that will cut out the entire design in full. So you have an outline die for this entire stamped image. But there are some a couple of individual dies that actually only cut out a small grouping, a little subset of the larger design. And that's what makes it a little bit ideal to have that as the aperture on the front of the card to only show, that little portion of the larger design. And then when the person opens the card, they'll see that, oh, wow, this is part of this huge, floral design. And so what I did was I stamped just lightly. It was with a very, very light ink, just that little floral section there. And I only stamped it enough so that I could position the die to cut that aperture out. And here I have a panel that is the full 5 inches tall, and the 3D embossing folder of the month I think is fabulous because it's got a lot of different sections to it, which I think as a whole look really cool, kind of quilty almost. But you could also just use those individual sections in part just by themselves. And that's exactly what I did with this purple panel here, where there was a border design on the 2 sides, actually all 4 sides of the 3D embossing folder. And I used that stretch to add this little bit of a embossed border to this purple panel. And I transferred the aperture so that I can cut that same opening through my purple layer, and that way that aperture sees straight through to the inside of the card. The clear stamp of the month also comes with several sentiments, as well as this sort of a nice border stamp design, as well as the coordinating die that cuts it out. And I really love that, it's not just your standard rectangle die for, cutting out sentiment banners. It's got a little bit of decorative edge to it on the left and right side. So kind of nice to have that. I thought maybe I would want to add a little bit more of that same design somewhere else on the front of the card. So I did a partial die cutting of just that grouping of flowers and leaves, and then die cut that out. I don't end up actually using it though, but you'll see me sort of audition different layouts. So right now I'm just preparing all of the different pieces that I want to have on the front of my card. And one thing to mention about the clear stamp and die of the month is that you do always have the option of just getting the stamp by itself if you did not want the coordinating dies that go along with it. But I feel like this one is kind of unique just in the fact that you do have for the stamped image the outline die that will cut it out in full, but there's actually 2 additional dies that cut out just a small portion so that will lend itself to being used in a lot of different ways. So this being one, you could also, the other idea I played around with was die cutting just those portions and then doing a little bit of sort of almost like a decoupaging where you have, the one layer of the full image, and then you can kind of raise or put some foam behind these particular sections and just lift, have some dimension on just a couple of these elements. So that might be another interesting way to use it as well. And these little flower groupings that you can die cut out separately or individually, they're just really nice little accents too. So I could imagine using them in combination with the sentiments as well, just having a little accent with, at the end of the sentiment. And so lots of fun little ways that you can use it, and something that I don't think I've seen before, where there's a coordinating die, but it actually doesn't cut out the entire design, but lets you cut into the design, which is something that if you've seen some of my previous videos, I do that all the time. I snip into stamped images, all the time. So kind of neat to have dies too that will do that for you. So a couple of finishing touches here. The front of the card is fairly simple and clean, which is what I was going for, because I want a little bit of that surprise when you open the card and you see this fuller floral design. But as I was looking at it, I felt like it still needed something. So I pulled out I love this DMC floss. It's the Diamante embroidery metallic floss, and it's lovely. And I absolutely love that Spellbinders is selling this. So a crafty friend of mine first introduced me to this, and I'm really hooked on it because it's super thin, very shiny, really, really lovely to work with. Great to stitch with if you do get the stitching die of the month, for example. I don't, but I think that I've stitched with this type of floss before, and it stitches up beautifully. And Spellbinders sells them, which is awesome. So there's actually, I believe, 2 4-packs that you can get. I have this one, which is a little bit of the holiday colors. So you've got your red and your green, along with, this looks like it's just white, but it's actually iridescent. So it's got a little bit of that sort of rainbow shine to it. And because I am adding this kind of as an afterthought, I did have to peel up the banner that I put down originally. But it's okay because it's going over the exact same area. So if it peeled up, or if I lost any cardstock, it's not the end of the world. It'll all get covered up again once that banner goes right back where it was. I just lost a little bit of foam adhesive is all. And I'm just going to create a little nest of this thread because it just adds a little bit of texture, a little bit of interest. And I have a glue dot down there so that as I twist and twirl this thread around, I can anchor it onto something so that it somewhat stays in place as I fiddle with it a little bit, because the thread, you want it to look natural, but I also want it to not look too uniform. And right now it's looking very bubbly, and that's just kind of the nature of this thread, where once you pull it off the spool, it'll have that tendency to curl a little bit. But I do love that it drapes really, really beautifully as well. So if you're using it to tie bows, for example, it's very lovely for that as well. And I think the second 4-pack that Spellbinders sells is, I think it has a lot of your basic golds and maybe a silver. And the only reason why I didn't get that is because I already have an individual spool of gold and silver. And in this DMC, their Diamante line of metallic embroidery floss, there are a lot of different golds, lots of different golds, which I don't know exactly how distinct and how subtle they are in their differences, but I don't feel like I need a lot of variety of golds because I don't think my eyes can really discern the difference. But I feel like that added just a little something different and special. So I like how that turned out in the end. Okay, so moving on to my next layered card. This is going to be the Gatefold card. And I have a piece of heavyweight cardstock here that I'm starting off with, a piece that measures 5.5 tall by 10.5 wide. And along the 10.5 inch edge, I am scoring at 1 3/4 and then 3.5. And I'll rotate that 180 degrees and replicate those 2 score lines. So 1 3/4 and then 3.5 from both sides along that 10.5-inch edge. And you saw me flip to the back, and that's because I like to reverse, when I fold my score lines, I like to fold them as mountain folds. And what will happen is at that 3.5-inch score line, that's going to be a mountain fold. But at the 1.75-inch score line, that needs to be a valley fold. So it helps when you are folding to fold where the indentation that you're making as you score, that becomes the peak of your mountain because you've softened that side and you'll get a cleaner fold if you fold that as a mountain. And so when this gets folded down, this is going to be a bit of a double gatefold. And when it gets folded down, it will measure 3.5 inches by 5.5 inches, which is actually the size of mini slimline that I tend to make. Mostly because I can fit 2 mini slimline card bases if the height is 5.5. And I know some mini slimlines are a different dimension. I think 3.25 by 6.25 is often very popular, but this is the size that I generally tend to make. And I have here the small die of the month, which is really fabulous. It's got a lot of these gorgeous decorative dies that cut a design into your card, but it does have these partial border dies and or this one anyways, and then the other just cuts a straight line. But what's great about this is that I'm using it to create a little bit of a decorative gate. So all I did was center that onto the 2 ends that measure 1.75 inch. So our most outside gates essentially, and centered it top and bottom. And then I just ran it through my die cutting machine because it doesn't die cut that bottom edge of the design. It just die cuts that decorative, curvy border. And so I thought that would be kind of a fun way of just creating a shaped border. And when the two halves come together, you kind of get this different design where they meet up as well. And the die does include as one of the those gorgeous detailed die plates will fit perfectly into that shaped panel as well. And then you get a lot of these kind of strips designs, and you can use those in a lot of different ways. They don't have any outside cutting edges, so you can just use them to cut, as I'm doing here, a decorative pattern right into your card. And so it gives it that really lacy feel, almost like a doily. And you could, if you wanted, actually stitch through those holes too. So I feel like this die does a little bit of double duty in that way, and it's really, really gorgeous. And so I am I have all my pieces here, and I did pull actually a die from the March Glimmer of the Month. And this pattern paper, I pulled from this month's Quick and Easy Card Kit of the Month, which I thought went really well with, it kind of, I don't know why, this checkered pattern, I feel, suits this doily kind of effect or look of the design that gets cut into these papers, but I thought it matched really well. So I also wanted this card to, while it does have all of those details, I feel like this card would be great for anyone really, even if they're not super into florals. And I wanted to try to do something where I didn't, because I do tend to use a lot of pinks and purples along with a lot of my cards, just because lots of Spellbinders dies do have a lot of floral elements to them. So I thought it might be interesting to try to not use any pinks and purples on this card. This die, as I briefly mentioned, is actually from the Glimmer of the Month from March. And what I've done is I've die cut it once out of Gold Mirror card, and I used the Sentiment Glimmer plate to actually just die cut into that foil card. I used the same label die to cut out of solid blue to back the sentiment, and then I die cut twice out of just plain white cardstock, and I folded each of those layers, each of my 2 white layers, and I only glued down half. So you can see I have just half of it glued down, the other half is free. And then I have a second blue layer that I'm going to add right to the back of that, and that will give me something that looks like this, where the bottom and the top layers, they're not actually glued together because we have that folded piece, the folded white layer of cardstock. And this is going to be my locking mechanism. So I can slide that right into my gates can slide right into the sort of sandwich that we created. And that piece there with our sentiment keeps the gates from springing open. And so you can do this technique with any gatefold, double gatefold if you like. And I find that it's just a nice way to present a gatefold because it just keeps those gates closed. Okay, so now moving on to my interactive card. This features the large die of the month, and it's perfectly sized so that you can use these frames, and the frame itself that I'm die cutting, you'll see in a moment, only cuts the pattern, this gorgeous pattern, into your card. So this panel I've cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and you can see it cuts beautifully, this really lovely pattern. Again, there are some elements here where if you wanted, you could actually stitch through some of those holes, but really great that we have this die that just cuts a design into your card, so you could just use it like that. But it does also have a coordinating die that will cut the outside cutting edge if you wanted to, say, make a shaped card. It also has a separate die that I just used to cut an inner aperture. So lots of different ways that you can use this, and kind of mix and match between those 3, whether you want to have that inner opening or if you want to have a shaped outside edge. And what I'm going to do is I've pulled, again, another sheet of 6x6 pattern paper from the Quick and Easy card kit of the month, and that's what will go behind my shaker window. But I want to, it's got a lot of patterns, it's got a lot of colors, and what I want to do is actually maybe kind of tone that down a little bit so that the focus isn't on the actual pattern and trying to read and make out all of those little elements. And so for my shaker window, the layer on top will be vellum, and I'm going to adhere that to the back of my yellow panel here. And vellum is always nice when you want to take something that you feel is a little bit busy and just sort of knock it back a little bit so that our eyes don't feel like we need to make out what is going on there, because it just makes it less, you can still see the pattern, you can still appreciate it, but it's a little bit harder because it's just not quite as clear. Then what I decided, this would have been easier to do before I put the vellum down, But what I decided is to back my yellow panel with some white. And that way it solves two things. One, it makes the pattern that was all that intricate pattern is easier to actually see if it's not sort of clouded by the pattern paper. So because there's solid white behind there, it makes it so that you can kind of recognize that pattern a lot more easily than having the pattern paper behind those open areas. That was the first reason to add that white panel. The second reason to add the white panel is so that as I'm putting my foam here to create my shaker well, my foam actually won't be visible through. The openings are pretty small, so even if you didn't have this layer of white, I don't think it would be the end of the world to just apply the foam straight to, say, the yellow layer of cardstock that I had. But I feel like if I didn't cover every little bit of that yellow panel without the white, that it wouldn't look consistent. And so by having that white cardstock layer, all of the pattern has white behind it, not just the portions that I'll end up covering with foam. And so that might be another good reason to just add that second layer. And you could back that with any color, so that you can get a different color coming through as the pattern there. And as with all shaker cards, you just want to make sure that when you're placing your foam, not to leave any gaps or openings where your shaker bits might be able to escape. So I just want to do a quick little preview. I wasn't sure exactly what colors of sequins I wanted to have as my shaker bits because I want it to be visible, but still want it to be a little bit subtle because I'm planning to add more on top. And I always have a really hard time with knowing how much fill is enough, how much is too much, because you don't want so much fill in there that it doesn't really move, but not enough, and it feels a little bit underwhelming to when you shake it. I think I could have gotten away with adding a little bit more sequins, so something that I can keep in mind for next time. Plenty of movement, but when it's all settled to the bottom, it doesn't look quite as generous or interesting. But I think it's still okay. It's just fine. And the way I like to make my shaker cards is I do like to just put another layer of acetate on the back. That way, when I'm coming to this step and I'm putting it on top of my card base, it's a lot easier for me to do it this way than to put the shaker fill onto my card base and then try to line up the frame, the shaker window on top of it. I inevitably get it wrong, and so I found that what works for me is to just close off the shaker with another layer of acetate, and that allows me to use that shaker element as a single piece that I can then position however I like. And so I've always, now that I've discovered this, works really well for me. I only do it that way. It's a little bit of extra acetate, but for me, it's worth it. And here I've pulled out, there are some really cool sentiment. I like this thin, super, super thin font, but I love the size of it, the size of the font, and I do like that thin font. And you get several words. There are individual words in the large die of the month, and each of the words does have a shadow layer or a bubble layer, so that because it's so thin, that bubble layer really helps set it apart. And I forgot to mention that piece of ephemera that did come from the Quick and Easy card kit of the month. Okay, so now on to my last card, my pop-up card. I am going to start off with the 3D embossing folder of the month, and I have a panel here that's been cut to 4 inches wide by 5 1/4 tall, so just shy of USA 2. And I am just positioning it so that I really capture in full, nice and centered, that central design of the embossing folder. It's one of the things I really love about this size embossing folder, because especially if you're like me and you like to make these smaller cards, which I think USA 2 is sort of considered on the smaller side, it really lets you pick and choose what parts of the design you want to use. And with this folder in particular, there are so many different designs, which in full together I think look awesome. But there's lots of different border designs which you can use on their own as well, which it was a technique that I showed earlier. So this I will be using on the front of my card. And I've pulled out the small die of the month. This die, unlike the first one that I used earlier on the double gatefold, this die cuts all the way around. So it does cut that bottom straight edge. And I am using that to cut out this panel from a darker shade of purple cardstock. And this leftover bit of scrap here, I'm going to use that too. So that's the exact same color as the dry embossed panel. And I'm going to take one of the decorative dies from the small die of the month, one of the straight ones, and I'm going to cut into that little strip, and I'm going to take the curvy one and cut into the darker purple panel. These designs actually fit exactly 4¼ inches wide. So they are perfect if you do like to make USA 2 size cards. They are perfect for using if you want to fill the panel all the way across that 4¼ inch length. The straight designs, they repeat. So you could always shift them down and do a second or a third die cut if you wanted to stretch that design across a wider stretch of cardstock. So all you would do is just move your die down, lock the die into a previously cut area that matches up, and then continue die cutting. I've got some scrap white cardstock here, and I've just cut myself 2 1/2-inch strips. They happen to be 3 inches wide or tall, but I didn't really mind too much whatever they happen to be. I would definitely recommend at least 2 inches. 3 inches worked out pretty well for me. You could go up to 4 or more if you wanted, but there is going to be a limit, and I'll show you that in a bit when we get to using those pieces. I've pulled the large die of the month where I'm getting these word dies, and you get in that set, the 2 I'm using for this card are for you. The other words that you get, you saw hello earlier on my interactive card, and then also included is best wishes. So for all of those words, you get the die itself, which I'm going to cut out of a darker purple, and you get that shadow layer or the bubble layer, and I've die cut that out of white. So I'll be using those words to create my sentiment for the front of the card. And I mentioned earlier, I really love the size and the font on these words. For these ones in particular, it's not all attached. So the F in 4 is separate from the rest of the word, and the Y in U is also separate from the rest of that word. But with the bubble layer, it does make it easy for you to fit it all together again. And I think this is one of those cases where I will probably always use the bubble layer because the weight of the font is so thin. I think it's always going to benefit from having that bit of a shadow or a bubble all the way around to set it off from whatever you're going to position this onto in order for it to be legible. So usually I'm a big fan of having the letters be separate so that if you do have a lot of words in the same font, you could possibly mix and match those letters and create your own new words. But in this case, one, it's a scripty font, so it does make sense for it to be connected. And two, the font is so thin. I don't think I would use them individually. So here are those strips, those 1/2-inch strips. And all I've done is I've folded it in half and then folded each of those halves in half again. So basically folded this into quarters, and I have 4 equal sections. The first section, I'm going to put glue just on that first section, butt up the edge, against but not going over the score line, and I'm going to glue and burnish that down to the bottom. Then I'm only putting glue to the 4th section, and then I closed my card. That ensures that my card will fold down flat, and I can ship this. And by folding it closed, it's just going to find its perfect position. This is how I always attach pop-up mechanisms. If it is meant to be folded down flat, I like to always attach it by folding it down flat. And so with this piece, these came from the small die of the month. On that lighter lavender strip, I just put adhesive on the left and right edge and the bottom edge, and that creates this little pocket. And as you can see, I'm fitting it to be a gift card holder, and that is what I'm going to have pop up on the inside of our card. So I put glue on the second section of my pop-up stand. I'm butting up my decorative element right up to the pop-up stand, and again folding it flat, folding it closed, so that the glue on the pop-up stand finds exactly where it needs to go, and everything is perfectly positioned and can still fold down flat. Then I decided I wanted a little bit something behind the pop-up element. And so this is just a sheet of pattern paper from the Quick and Easy card making kit, and this one actually has a touch of foiling, so I love that. It just adds something a little bit extra to the inside to really complete that, not quite a scene, but I feel like it helps to not have so much white back there on the inside. So I love that pattern. And I do like to put everything on the inside. I like to attach that all first, especially because I am using this 3D dry embossed panel on the outside, and I didn't want to be opening and closing and burnishing down onto this panel, potentially flattening it. We worked so hard to get all that lovely 3D embossed texture there, so I wanted to save this for last, just to make sure that it really holds up and you get all of that beautiful detail. And anytime I attach something to a 3D dry embossed panel, I like to use my Collal 3D glue gel, because it does help to get into all of those nooks and crannies. I'm not going for a raised look on these words. That's why I'm putting this acrylic block right on top, so it will push it down. But that glue gel just gets into all of those nooks and crannies, and I feel will help to secure it a little bit better than just using regular glue. So here's a final look at all of my cards today. Again, this is my pop-up card, so when you open it, it features on the inside this gift card holder, which I made from the small die of the month, and a bit of that splash of design is from the Quick and Easy card making kit for April. On the outside, again, I used the 3D embossing folder, and the words came from the large die of the month. This card is my double gatefold card, and it does also feature the small die of the month for that outermost gate. The locking mechanism is actually from the Glimmer of the month from March. So that was last month's Glimmer of the month. And it's the die and the Glimmer sentiment, but I used the Glimmered sentiment as a die to cut out that sentiment. My next card is my flat card. This features this month's Glimmer of the month and also the coordinating stencil, the layering stencil that goes with it to help you create that depth and dimension and make it really easy to color in all of those leaves. Here is my layered card, or one of my layered cards, featuring this little peekaboo window. So maybe a little bit of an interactive element there, but this one features the clear stamp of the month and a bit of the 3D embossing folder of the month, just along that little border strip there. And finally, here is my interactive card. This features the large die of the month, an ephemera piece from the Quick and Easy card making kit, along with a sheet of pattern paper from the same kit, and the word die is also from the large die of the month. So I hope that you enjoyed these 5 cards that I made featuring some of the Spellbinders club kits. If you are watching this on April 1st, I do have a live stream later today at 2 p.m. Pacific. I hope that you join me during that live stream. I'm going to be doing a comparison of the December 2022 card making kit, and that was the last kit in the previous formation of the card kits. And I'll compare that with this month's, so April's Quick and Easy card making kit, and give my thoughts on it. I had a lot of people ask me what I thought about the new configuration of the card kit, and I requested to see if I could maybe get one of the Quick and Easy kits, and Spellbinders was kind enough to provide me one so that I could try it out for myself and give you my thoughts on it. And if you are catching this on April 1st and can join me live, I really hope that you do. If you're catching this afterwards, I hope you catch it on replay and let me know in the comments what you think. I'm always really curious to hear what everybody thinks of my projects, but also the products that I feature. So do join me for that stream, and immediately following the live stream I will be premiering my card making video where I use only the Quick and Easy card making kit, and I will be in the live chat along with you, and we can all watch that together after the live stream discussion. Thanks so much for catching this video. Until next time, happy crafting and have a fantastic day. Bye.